Hello, friends. This is Doug Schaible, and welcome to the Premature Bible Institute. Just want to thank you for continuing on in these lessons. I appreciate them very much. Hopefully, they've been a blessing and a help to you. Like I say, I don't claim to be infallible or anything like that, but just giving you some food for thought on some of these issues that we're talking about in the Old Testament as we go through and lay foundational teaching for things that will come later on. Last week we talked a little bit about, there were several things that we talked about. We talked about how Sarah, Abraham's wife Sarah had died, but she had also given birth to a son by the name of Isaac. And then Isaac later on married Rebekah. And then Isaac and Rebekah had two children, Jacob and Esau. Esau was born first, then Jacob. And their characters were very different. Esau was he was a man's man. He was the kind of guy that liked to go hunting and fishing, and what most men, I guess, even today would think are men. Jacob was the kind of guy that kind of hung around the house, took care of things, looked out for his mom and things like that. Not bad. It's just different. They're different types of people, but Isaac really liked, I think, Esau the best because of just the way he was. But as God had planned, he wasn't the one through whom the promise was going to be continued through. It was going to eventually be Jacob. And so the characters were very different. We noticed that Jacob really had a respect for his parents, looked after them, was concerned about the promises that had been given to Isaac and so on. But Esau did not. If you remember right, Esau sold his birthright just for some kind of a stew that Jacob was making. And so he sold his birthright. In other words, he said, yeah, well, so what if I'm the representative of the family? That's not that important to me. I mean, if I die while I'm trying to do that because I'm hungry, what good's the birthright going to do to me? So he sold his birthright to Jacob as a result of that. And it said there in the scripture, it says, as a result of this, Esau despised his birthright. So he didn't care for it at all, which showed a kind of a lack of wanting to identify with his parents, if you want to put it that way, with his father. Jacob then receives the blessing. Now, the way it was done, to us, at least it seems like there was a conniving attitude there between not only Jacob and but also his mother. They kind of tricked Isaac into giving the birthright to Jacob. And this really made Esau upset. He really got, not the birthright, but the blessing, but gave the blessing to Jacob rather than Esau. And Esau really got upset at this and said, okay, as a result of this, as soon as the days of mourning are over for my father, I'm going to kill him. So that's what it was. So as a result of that, Jacob's mother sent him out of the country to go back to the land where Abraham and Isaac had come from, or Abraham had come from over there in Haran and so on, where Abraham's father had passed away also. So Jacob is on his way back over there, and on the way, he said Jacob stops at a place, and it was eventually called Bethel, and he lays down there, and sleeps for the night, puts a rock there by his head, or on for his pillow, and he lays down on it, and he has a dream. And he has this dream of this ladder that went from the earth up to heaven. And at the top of that ladder, there was the Lord, and the Lord was speaking. But on this ladder, it says there were angels ascending and descending on this ladder. And so as a result of this, God gives a blessing to Jacob. And so Jacob was really honored by that and made a promise to God as a result of that. So he sees the Lord. So when Jacob went back to his family's line, not his father, but his father's family, he works for a man by the name of Laban, who was an uncle or something like that. And Laban has two daughters, and Jacob wants to marry one of them. Her name was Rachel. She was the younger daughter. He was in love with her, and so he said, if you work for me 7 years, you can have Rachel. And so he worked for him for 7 years, and then when he got ready to consummate that marriage and so on, Laban switched him out and gave him Leah rather than Jacob, and did it kind of where Jacob wouldn't know what was going on. He wakes up the next morning and finds out he's with Leah. And as a result of this, there was this problem. And so he says, oh, I can't do, Laban says, I can't do this. I said, we can't give the younger ahead of the older. The older daughter needs to get married first. And so Laban had actually tricked Jacob the way Jacob had tricked a lot of other people in the past. So Jacob works 7 more years, and then he gets Rachel. And then during that time, Rachel couldn't give birth to children. She was barren, and so what she wanted to do is she gave Jacob her handmaid, and the handmaid had children, and so he had children by the handmaid. So he's got now these 3 wives, and then as a result of that, Leah decides to give him her handmaid, and so now he's got these 4 wives. They're bearing children, and he ends up with 13 children, 12 sons and 1 daughter. So anyway, it's kind of like that, and he marries them all, and they finally the day comes where they decide they're going to head back to his homeland there to Canaan. And on the way back there, they hear that Esau is coming, and they hear that he's coming towards or riding towards Jacob. And Jacob's worried about this. He doesn't know if his brother still wants to kill him or not. So he divides his family into 3 sections, and he sends them over this river there. It was called the river Jabbok. And he sends them over in 3 waves. And each wave that went ahead, they would come up to Esau, bow down to him, and offer him gifts and presents and so on. And every time they did that. So he sends them all over the river, go across the river, and he stays back on the other side. As a result of that, it says a man came up to Jacob, and he starts wrestling with Jacob. Now I don't know how it all started. And we find out later on it was the angel of the Lord, and we don't know if it tells him something, and then Jacob starts wrestling with him. We do know this. It says that they wrestled all night long, and the next morning the angel said to Jacob, he says, let me go because the day is breaking. And Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So whatever it was, Jacob was holding on for dear life. It wasn't like he was trying to get away from this angel, and the angel wasn't trying to hold him down. The angel was trying to get away. Now, the angel obviously could have got away. That's not a problem. But the point was he wanted Jacob to understand that he was done with him. He was going to leave. And if he left, if the angel of the Lord was going to leave, then his work with Jacob was going to be finished from that point on. And Jacob just says, oh no, I can't let this happen. I don't want to be left out in this. So he wrestles with the angel. And at the end of that morning, he says, let me go, for the day breaks. Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. The angel, to make a long story short, blesses Jacob. And then it says he touched him in the hollow of his thigh, right there where the joint is. And he says, and the sinew there shrank. So I don't know exactly what that meant, but he had this painful limp from that point on. And so we know that the rest of his life he had this limp. And I think that this limp was a reminder to Jacob about that event and what would have happened had he not believed in the Lord. And I think what this was a reminder of his dependence upon God. And so Jacob heads back to Canaan, and he heads over there, and he wrestled, like I said, he wrestled with the Lord, but now he's trusting the Lord, and you never see him from this point on ever being devious or deceitful. You see him really trusting the Lord in all kinds of things. Now, Jacob at this particular point had 12 sons and 1 daughter, and his favorite was and the favorite son that he had was Joseph. Now, Joseph was the firstborn from Rachel, the one he loved the most, the wife he loved the most. So he really loved Joseph because Joseph was the son of his old age. He had Rachel in his old age and so on. So this now starts the story, this particular lesson. And this particular lesson, I think, to me, is one of the most exciting stories in the Old Testament. It's just a really, really neat story. And we're not going to get it done in one lesson, but there's a lot here and a lot I want you to really think about. And there's a lot of pictures in this story, a lot of illustrations that I think will be useful for farther down the road. So let's just go ahead and start with the story, and then we'll talk about it. So we're starting in Genesis chapter 37 and verses 1 through 3, and it says this. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, this is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. Now, Bilhah and Zilpah, those were the two maids I was telling you about that were the maids of Rachel and Leah, okay? So he was with Bilhah and Zilpah's sons, and they were out there doing some stuff. And Joseph brought a bad report to them of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also, well, let me just stop there. He said, well, let me say this. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. So let's just go through a little bit of this right here. And I may have said the story of Jacob is an exciting story, but what I mean is the story of Joseph. This story about Joseph is just a really, really exciting story, and this is what we're going to be talking about for next, however, until we're finished with this particular event. Okay. So Jacob, he dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger. Now, so Jacob had gone back to Canaan, and he had these children, and some of them were born before he came back and so on, but he had 12 sons and one daughter. Dinah was his daughter, and then he had these other sons. And said, now the one, like I said, is Joseph, was 17 years old, and he was feeding the flock with his brothers. And so his brothers must have been doing something that was not right, whatever it could have been. Who knows what it could have been. Maybe they were cheating their father. Maybe they were just doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. But anyway, he went back and brought a bad report of them to his father. And so they were upset about this, I'm sure, because here's a tattletale telling on him about everything. Now, like I said, Joseph was the son of Rachel, Jacob's favorite son. And Jacob made this coat of many colors for Joseph. Now, I don't understand the significance of the coat of many colors other than it shows a special relationship between Jacob and Joseph. Other than that, I'm not sure, but it was special. It was something unique. Otherwise, it wouldn't be mentioned here in Scripture. So it was something unique, and maybe there was much more significance in that culture than I know about. But whatever it was, one thing for sure is it does show a special bond, a special relationship between Joseph and his father. Okay, now Joseph, but at the same time, he was kind of the tattletale of his brothers. He was the one kid that seems like people have just tattled on the other ones all the time. He's the kind of one you kind of knock on the front of his head. And he was the one knucklehead of the family, according to the brothers and so on, all the siblings. They didn't care for him all that much, and probably because his father liked him the most. Now, if you probably, a lot of you, especially younger folks, don't know who I'm talking about. A lot of the older folks will. There was a comedy team years ago, the Smothers Brothers, and there was Tom and Dick Smothers, and they always used to have this routine. And Dick was the one who played the kind of the sensible, thoughtful. He was the straight man. And then Tommy, he was the one that was just kind of the knucklehead. He was just the one that was out there and kind of simple-minded and whatever. And he would always, whenever he'd get stuck, he'd go, Mom always liked you best, and always do something like that. And that was they made a whole routine on Mom always liked you best. And so that's what it was. And that's probably what they felt about him. Dad always likes you best. And it made him upset. So Jacob, that's who Joseph was among the brothers and so on. But then there's something that comes up here a little bit. Oh, well, let me ask you this. They were probably jealous and envious of Joseph. Obviously, Joseph got the coat of many colors, which signified something special, and they were probably jealous of that. Why didn't we get one? Why does he always get all the good stuff? Well, maybe it's because he was treated his father right. Who knows? All the different things. So, but let me ask you this something. And this is something that's important because I think it's important to understand for the rest of what you're learning, and always for what you're learning. Where did this jealousy originate? Did it originate with Joseph? Was it because of his characteristic? Is that where it originated? Did it originate with Jacob because he was showing favoritism all the time to Joseph? Or did it originate with Adam? See, that's the thing. Many times we think that all these different things, the things that we see that are not right, we think they originate with that person or this person or within me, but in reality, it originated with Adam, didn't it? When Adam sinned, that propensity to think independently of God and do your own thing, as we used to say back in the 60s, that started with Adam. And that it's not genetic in the sense of we can find the sin gene or something like that, but that nature to sin is inherent in all human beings. And I think I told you this before. I like to say this in a political realm. I said the framers of the Constitution understood two immutable principles. One, every one of them knew that they were flawed men. The second principle they understood was so was everyone else. And so therefore they designed a document not to control flawed people, but to control flawed people with power. And so I think that's how we have to look at this. And so in this case here, that's what we're looking at as 12 flawed people, and plus their dad and their mom and everybody before them, the Tower of Babylon, from Adam on, everybody is flawed. So sure, some of it might have been Jacob, some of it might have been Joseph, some of it might have been the brothers, but they were all flawed. But it's what we do with that flaw that makes a difference. So even though we are flawed, doesn't mean we have to act like that. So Joseph is, kind of the one that everybody kind of doesn't looks down on. They don't care. He's the brother we want to keep out of our way. We want to do our own thing, do the stuff that we want to really do without old tattletale over there telling on us. But then there's another event comes up, and this is a really, really important event because it starts telling us something about Joseph, about the brothers, and about this whole story. So Genesis chapter 37, verses 5 through 11 says this. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So this dream, whatever it is, really causes them to dislike him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. And now he's going to explain it to them. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. If you don't know what a sheave is, it's like you see some of those wheat shocks. I'm from Wichita, Kansas, and they call the team here the Shockers. The wheat shockers is what it is. And there's those shocks of wheat that you see standing in a field sometime. Not the big round bales, but ones where they bundle them together and stick up like that. So he said, there we were, binding sheaves in the field. They were tying them up. Then behold, my sheaf arose. In other words, mine stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. So in other words, there he is in the center. His sheaf is standing up, and all the other ones are 12. All 12 of them are bending towards his. Okay? And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So they really, really disliked him. They were just, in New Guinea we would say bellhot, which means their stomach was really burning. So the idea was that they were really upset with him because who are you, you arrogant little tattletale? Who did think that we're going to bow down to you, this young kid? And or have dominion over us. So he goes on. So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? So even his father hears this thing and he says, what's wrong with you? And he rebuked him for doing that and for saying that dream, So, but there's something you need to understand. There's two things that happen here, and I want you to see how they both responded. One is his brothers and one is Jacob. So his brothers envied him. They were just beside themselves with anger over this what this kid was saying. But here's what his father said, or it didn't say. Here's what his father thought. But his father kept the matter in mind. Now, I think what's happening here with Jacob, Jacob has had enough experience with the Lord by now to know that when something like this happens, there's more behind this than what it seems like. It isn't that Jacob is just sitting around saying, you guys are going to bow down to me. There's a reason why this story keeps coming up. First about the sheaves, and now about the stars, the sun, the moon, and the stars. So Jacob rebuked him, probably because maybe he was a little bit arrogant about it, what he was saying. The thing, too, is maybe he was just trying to calm the situation down. But the one thing for sure is he kept that in his mind. In the back of his mind, it was always there. I wonder why the Lord would give him this, or wonder why this was happening. See, Jacob had been through that. He'd seen the ladder going from earth to heaven, and the angels ascending and descending, and the Lord being up there talking to him from that. He also wrestled with the angel of the Lord there at the river Jabbok. So he knew something was going on here, and there was a reason for it. So he just kept that in the back of his mind, and he kept it there. He didn't say any more about it. He just kept it in mind and wanted to think about that. So the difference was the brothers were jealous and envious. And like I said, Jacob rebuked his son, but considered what he had heard. So how did Joseph's brothers respond to these dreams? In other words, how did this cause them to react to what he was doing? And here it says this in Genesis 37, verses 12 through 28. So this is going to be a little bit long, but I think you need to hear the story of what's going on here. This is a really good story here. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. So they went to this place to feed the flock because there's good grass there. And Israel said to Joseph, now let me back up. It says Israel said to Joseph, remember when God wrestled with him, he says, your name is no longer Jacob, but Israel, for you have prevailed with God and with men. So now that's what the name Israel means, prevailing with God and with men. So Israel, this is the first time when he wrestled with him there at the river Jabbok, that's the first time that name Israel is used. And it's used of a man, not of a country, but it will become a country. But first of all, by the man. And his name is Israel. So Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, here I am. Joseph says, here I am. Then he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was, wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, they have departed from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Let me just stop here for just a second. So his father sends him to there and says, and bring back word how they're doing. Now, can you imagine if you're one of the brothers and you hear that Joseph is coming to check up on you, and they're just probably thinking back to the incident where he went back and brought back an evil report, if you want to put it that way, about his brothers. So he's not there yet, but he's on his way to do that. Now, this event here where he sees this man in the field and asks him where his brothers are at, I'm not sure I understand the significance of that either, but the Lord, for whatever reason, thought it was important to put that in Scripture. So Jacob is going one place, finds out his brothers aren't there, and the guy tells him they went to Dothan. So Joseph heads to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come therefore, let us now kill him and cast him in some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. So you see, they still got this thing about their dreams in their head. And they're getting ready to kill him. They don't want any more part of him. They don't even want to hear his voice or anything anymore. And so, excuse me, they don't want to hear about him anymore, and they're just going to tell their father, hey, some wild animal killed him and devoured him, ate him. There's no more evidence of him anymore. But then something happened here. It says, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. And see, what they're doing is, let me say this also, they're testing God. What they're saying is this dream isn't a real dream. Joseph made that thing up. Or at the very best, he did have the dream, but he's claiming something that it isn't, making up his own interpretation about the dream that he had. And remember, Joseph didn't tell them what the dream meant. He just told them what the dream was. He didn't say anything else about it. So now these guys are upset. He says, we're going to make sure that this guy's dreams don't come true. All right? And so here's what happened. But Reuben, that's one of his brothers, Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him. And the reason he said that was that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So Reuben at least had some integrity. And so he says, okay, we need to teach him a lesson, but we can't kill him. He says he's our father's son. He's our brother. We just can't do that. So, and his intention was he was going to take care of him, at least, or look out so that he couldn't be harmed until they could get him back to his father. And there's more to the story other than that. Reuben went off somewhere, and then something happened here. So let's go with it. But Reuben heard it. So it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. So he's still wearing this thing. So here he is. He's told them his story, and he's still wearing this jacket in front of his brothers. It's like he's rubbing it in their noses in it, you know. And so anyway, I'm sure that really just upset him even to see that. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted up their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then the Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, I think in this situation, Reuben was actually somewhere else at this particular time. So Judah and his brother, Judah said, we can't kill him. He's our dad's son. So here's what we're going to do. We'll sell him to the Ishmaelites. He said, let's not do this for no profit. Let's get some money out of it if we're going to do something. Not just that way we'll not be guilty of killing him, but we will be guilty of selling him, but at least he's going to be alive and so on. And don't let our hand be upon him. And his brothers listened to him. It says, now it's interesting, they call them these Ishmaelites. So these Ishmaelites, if you think about it, they would have been like second cousins to them, because Abraham had two sons, didn't he? He had Isaac and Ishmael. And then Isaac had a son, so it'd be like Isaac would have been their grandfather. Ishmael would have been their step-grandfather to some degree, I guess, because he was Isaac's brother. So anyway, so you've got that going on. So they're relatives in some way anyway. They all had the same grandfather, just a different grandmother. So the brothers listened. Then the Midianite traders passed by and so on, and they took Joseph to Egypt. So Joseph is on his way to Egypt now. And eventually Reuben comes back, finds out what's going on, and it's just a mess. But we'll talk about that more as time goes on. So the actions of Joseph's brothers were like this. When they saw him coming, they wanted to kill him. All right? Reuben just wanted to teach him a lesson and send him back to Jacob. So he wanted to teach him, just keep your mouth shut. Listen, you don't need to come up here. And look, you come up here with that coat of many colors. I'm not saying that's actually what he said. I'm just saying that's how I would think. Just don't rub it in people's face like this, you know. So after Reuben left, they compromised, and they sold Joseph for 20 shekels of silver to Midian traders. And for a profit, that is, they sold him. So Joseph is sold into slavery. Joseph heads on to Egypt. And you know what happened next? Well, that's the next lesson. We'll talk about that some more. But it's an intriguing story, and it's one that's just really good. May I make a suggestion to you? There was a movie some years ago called Joseph. It is amazingly good. You need to watch it. Ben Kingsley is in it, so look for him being in that particular one. But it's well done. It's not a big, fancy, extravagant type of movie, not like a Cecil B. DeMille 10 Commandments type of movie. It's one that's done simply, but it's very, very good. And I think you would really appreciate it. So if you can find that somewhere, whether, I don't know where you can find it for sure. I don't know if it's on Netflix or Hulu or anything like that, but find it. It's just called Joseph. I think Paul Mercurio or somebody like a Mercurio guy is the guy that played Joseph. But you'll really like it. Like I said, Ben Kingsley is in his part. It's very accurate, very well done, and I think you'll really appreciate it. That'll give you the story. But it doesn't tell you everything about the story. What we're doing is explaining things. What I want you to understand is God is not finished. God is continuing on his promise that he gave to Eve and gave to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so it's continuing on. God hasn't forgotten his promise. He's doing what he said he's going to do. God gives, and you'll see more as this story progresses and develops. So I just want to say thank you again. Remember, if you have a friend that wants to listen to these, please have them subscribe. All that does is let them know, gives them a notice that I've got a new podcast up, and they can, both video and audio, have them subscribe to both if they can, but at least to either one of these if possible. In my audio podcast, just look for whatever your favorite podcast is. Just look it up under Premature Bible Institute. And then for the video podcast, just get on YouTube and look up my name, Doug Schaible, Schaible, and you'll be able to find it without any problem. Take care. We'll talk to you next week, and thanks again. Bye.